kind of another. Why don't we talk about the trust system in Final Fantasy XIV? Because I think this is kind of a really interesting thing where I think this is kind of a really interesting thing that they're introducing with the next expansion. That has a lot of history here because we're looking at what um, we're looking at basically like what other what games have done with kind of solo versus group content, and like this basically is they had something called the trust system in Final Fantasy XI. They're introducing this in Final Fantasy XIV. There's some kind of differences, although I think the kind of the design goals have been similar. So Malgrim is going to be our expert today about this because since he's played Final Fantasy 14, 11, and 14.
I feel so honored.
Right. And so and watched the live letter, which I don't watch for Final Fantasy 14. So knows a little bit more about this. So.
Yeah. So in 11, when the player bases started to dwindle down, or when they anticipated for the player bases to dwindle down, they introduced an NPC system, an NPC party system. That, I mean, basically, it's reminiscent of any Final Fantasy game in principle, where you have your main player character, and then you have a bunch of other characters that follow them around and help you fight stuff. I never played Guild Wars 1, so I don't know.
I know a little bit about the system on Guild Wars 1, and it's probably similar because you could basically get basically NPC helpers that would help you do group content. So
Okay.
But Guild Wars 1 I think it was a little more instanced than Final Fantasy 11, so
Yeah.
worked a little differently, but yeah.
So the way it would work is you'd go through the game story, which, like, the story for the most part was optional. Like, you could level up without really touching the story unless you needed to get to a specific zone that was gated behind a particular quest or whatever. But as the player base started to dwindle, they introduced a system so that people could get classes leveled up without having to rely on players. And they tried several different implementations of this. At one point, they had it so that you could summon a companion with an item, and then you could like gear out the companion with different classes and whatnot, and that kind of worked out, but not a lot of people really jumped on it. So then they did the trust system where you could get a full party of story NPCs to follow you around. And it worked out really, really well, but they were always less efficient than a player would be because each NPC would only have a set amount of abilities that they could use. So part of the almost like collectathon aspect of getting trust is trying to get the best trust for what they do. Like you could have like there are like 3 or 4 different red mage trusts, for example. Well, only one of them actually used the explicit red mage spell refresh to give MP regeneration to the party. So, but that was the hardest red mage to get. So you were encouraged to go after that harder content to get that character. The the difference from so
And like you said, though, like there's a huge collectible aspect of it where you had to
right.
go out and find these things, add them to a collection, and then you kind of pick and choose. It's like, okay, I want this trust and this trust and this trust and this trust with me to go do this content.
Right. And
Right.
like you could even get different variants of the same character as well.
Mm.
Which might have a slightly different class or might have slightly different weapon skills or spells, or even just AI behavior in general.
Mm.
But the one of the big important things is that each trust had its own AI behavior personality. So no two trusts would handle the same situation the same way twice, the in the same manner. So that made some of it kind of interesting to do certain things with different trusts just to see what would happen, or do certain fights as in with certain trusts, because like some mobs would actually have a particular weakness to a particular to a to a particular trust, so it would be beneficial for you to bring them even if they didn't necessarily complement your party in the best way possible. If I remember correctly, I think that was a thing for a couple of the fights. And so Final Fantasy XIV is introducing a version of the trust system, but the difference is that you won't be, according to what they've talked about in like the live letter and in interviews recently, is that you won't be able to summon trust in the overworld, which is a huge difference from Final Fantasy XI, and it's gonna be much more limited. Like I think there's only 5 trusts in Shadow that will be released in Shadowbringers, 5 or 6 maybe, and so.
And you'll get those through MSQ, I remember you saying?
Yeah, you get them through the Shadowbringers MSQ. So at certain points of the MSQ, certain trusts will be available while certain ones won't be. Because they were talking about in the video that I was watching, they were showing off the trust system in the live letter, and you only had 5 of the trusts available, and they're like, oh yeah, Y'shtola would be here, but we're not at that point in the MSQ, so that slot is obviously empty. So it sounds like over the course of the MSQ, you'll have certain characters available at certain points of time, and certain characters won't be available at certain points of time, and then probably at the end, you get everyone all together at once. Right. And so the way trusts work in 14 is that they are an alternative way to run dungeons compared to running with players. And there's like some benefits and some not benefits. I can't think the word.
Advantages, disadvantages.
Disadvantages. Wow. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. So like an advantage to running the trust is that they are heavily scripted NPCs inside the dungeons. I was actually thinking about it, Sai. And the NPCs inside the Alamigo expert, the Grim whatever it's called.
Gimlet Dark.
Yeah. Like there's a bunch of heavily scripted NPCs in that dungeon. I'm wondering if that was an experiment to test out.
A little proof of concept. Yeah. That makes sense. Because that's one of the most recent dungeons too, so yeah.
Yeah, I just ran it today, and I'm just like, oh shit, are these trusts?
Yeah, and there's a little bit of variation too, because I know at least the one part I've noticed is at the end, you have that basically that the robot that basically is going to self-destruct.
Yeah.
But there's no way you can do it. It's not always the same NPC that kills it. It's either Yugiri or
Hian.
Yeah, Hian. And they say different things. They do a different attack and whatnot.
Yeah, so. I think that was their proof of concept for the system.
Yeah. I noticed that. I never put that together, but yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that 14 tends to do that a lot. Like when they're playing with a new system, they'll do a proof of concept in some content release and go, oh yeah, that works. Okay, we'll push it further. Right. But anyways, I wish I had some footage for that fight to explain it. I should have thought of that beforehand.
Yeah.
But it just struck me today that was a thing. Anyways.
No, that's a good point. But anyway, so what you're saying is basically like the trusts are going to feel a bit like that. You're going to have these NPCs with you. They're going to basically be spewing out storylines, script lines. They're going to be doing specific behaviors and activities. Probably get a little bit of like what you talked about, where like certain people. Are you going to be able to pick who goes with you, or is it going to be
Yes.
like you? Okay, so there might be a little bit of that, like oh, if you bring your Shola along this one, then it's going to have this other additional content.
Yeah,
She's
so
going to have this other interaction or something like that.
yeah, so depending on who you bring with you and what composition you bring with you will alter what kind of interpersonal conversations they have with each other throughout the dungeon, which is really interesting. And it will also change how certain boss mechanics are handled.
Mm-hmm.
Like one footage that they kept showing in the live letter, they kept showing in the media tour, was the final boss of one of the dungeons. At one point, he drops the floor out, and there's like this small like glass bridge that you have to cross to get from one end of the arena to the other. And like the player is expected to just very carefully run around this bridge because it's a little bit of a zigzag. And what they were showing with that was that, say, Thancred, for that fight, he's supposed to be the Gunbreaker tank. He'll start running across the bridge, almost slip halfway across, say "fuck this," and he'll just leap across. He'll just use his gap closer to get the rest of the way instead of running the rest of the way. Instead of running across the second half of the bridge, he'll just gap close to the boss. Right. And Alice will just gun ho across the whole thing, just be like whatever. But Minfilia and Alphinaud, they will apparently, those characters are afraid of heights, and they will literally like hold their arms out and tiptoe across the bridge, and more than likely the mechanic will be complete before they get across, and the floor will just come back, and then they'll just resume because it's like a DPS check. And so they also showed like Oriange, he'll just forego the entire mechanic, wait for someone to get across, and then ethereal manipulation to them.
Nice.
Just be like, whatever.
Right.
Like, so that shows, like, it gives these characters a chance to show some actual personality and some quirk, and makes it a much more believable experience, I guess would be a word. It's not about efficiency, it's about the experience.
Right. It's kind of going back to what we were talking about. Like, they're telling a story here through essentially, like, not necessarily a cutscene, but through a scene that is not entirely focused on being as efficient as fast as possible. And this is going to be something that would be harder to do with other players because the other player would be like running off ahead or potentially or whatever. It's easier to kind of like force one person to watch a cutscene, in order to kind of experience the type of thing of like going across the narrow bridge. Versus when you have multiple people, it's like, well, it just feels like you're just kind of holding everything up. But yeah, and so like you said your feeling of this is basically it's kind of like a little bit more of a single player experience, a little bit more kind of like of a typical Final Fantasy story experience in the games. Yeah, like you played a lot of Final Fantasy 15, and so you felt a little bit like that. You were thinking.
Yeah, like as I was watching the footage, it very much reminded me of the interactions and the behaviorisms of your Final Fantasy 15 party, where I remember one particular fight in 15, like one of your guys just gets freaked out and just like goes and hides in a corner until one of your buddies runs over, pats him on the back, goes, "Come on, we can do this." And they're like, "Okay, I believe you." And then they go like limit break or something. And it very much reminded me of Final Fantasy 15 in that sense. And I think that's where they kind of got the idea for it, to be honest. And one of the other things that they talked about that I thought was really interesting and kind of a cool thing for them to think about doing is limit breaks.
Right.
Where they were saying like Alice A, she's a Spitfire, like she gives no fucks. As soon as that limit break gauge, because you can get limit break 1 with trusts. As soon as that limit break gauge fills out, Alice A's gonna fire it off. She gives no fucks.
Right.
But if you have like Minfilia with you and you're a DPS, she's gonna wait for you to do it. If you take too long, eventually she'll do it. But she's gonna hold off and let you have your moment. If you're a tank or a healer, then she'll handle it because, well, there's no, who's gonna waste an LB for a tank or a healer? Yourself.
Right.
So like that helps shows their personalities. Where Minfilia is a little more patient, and Alice just wants to kill stuff.
Right. She's the go type of DPS, huh?
Yeah. And I think like they're kind of making a comment about players through the trusts too.
Right.
Which I thought was kind of funny and very meta for them to think about.
Yeah, because like the limit break is kind of like, it's generally kind of reserved for the DPS to do big damage, but sometimes people use it at less optimal times,
and everyone gets mad at them.
Right. Because generally you want the melee DPS to use it because it does like large single target damage, so you want to save it for the end boss. Knock off some health of the boss and get through the fight a little faster. Ranged DPS can also use it, but basically it's more of an AoE thing when they do it, and so it's going to do less damage to a single target. And so if you have like a melee DPS and a ranged DPS, and the ranged DPS blows the limit break,
everyone groans.
Right, everybody's like, why'd you do that? Now we have to spend an extra 15 seconds on this boss. How dare you?
How dare you waste my time?